Hi, Donnell. So good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hey, Shar. Hey, Sumit.
Donnell, good morning.
Hopefully, we might have Howard join us in a few minutes, but Jules is going to be out today, so she's not going to be able to join us.
So Donnell, where are you located? I love hearing earlier you've been in a few exciting places, but where are you at today?
Today I'm home in beautiful sunny Nevada near Lake Tahoe. Very
Wow.
fortunate. Came to the no state income tax state after living in Hong Kong and getting to experience 2 states and 2 countries over 6 years. It was great.
Well, you were telling us that story earlier, and I just found that very fascinating. Last week we talked a lot about people living in various places these days. So
Yeah, and now that we're in tax season, tax is on everybody's mind, right? So it's
like it or not, you got to pay the government.
I know.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where in the world you go, you're going to pay U.S. taxes if you carry a little blue passport.
Yeah, that's right. The fun part is now that my all my children are paying their own taxes, they're coming to me. So like, how do you do this? I'm like, geez, I haven't done my own taxes in years, and so I'm trying to walk them through the simple forms. It's quite a challenge.
So Sam, do you have someone that does your taxes, or do you do your own?
Well, for my business and personal, I do. And you know what? And that's my gripe with doing taxes is that the hard part is getting together all the paperwork, and then it's like, and just going through the process. Of course, there's the elements of tax where, if you have a business, it can get complicated though. But on a personal basis, for most of us, it's just the hard part is just getting all the documents together and everything. I hate that. It takes so much time.
So having lived in India for a while, I just want to say that we have nothing compared to what Sumit goes through.
Oh yeah. So tell us about that, Sumit. What is your burden?
It's tax season here as well, and the tax system is really complicated, especially for people who are self-employed. Because when you're part of an organization, you get a fair bit of free advice, but it's just crazy. I hate one, you got to pay the government. Second, you got to invest effort in paying the government as well. I wish they'd just take the money and let me live in peace.
Yeah, that's one funny thing that like when I do my taxes and I often get this letter from the government says, oh, you owe us an extra $200 or something like that. I'm like, if you know what I'm supposed to pay, then why don't you just take the money and instead of me having to do it's like
do it automatically.
Yeah. They never come back and say, hey, you overpaid, here's $200 back. They never do that.
Not at
Crazy.
all.
One, I'm supposed to pay you. Second, I need to pay somebody to figure out exactly how much I have to pay you.
Yeah.
Because you'll find me if you find I've paid lesser than what you wanted from me.
Yeah.
Well, we all suffer together.
That's
yeah,
right.
well, Simon, I have to say, having lived in Asia for 6 years and spent quite a bit of time in India and moved people in and out of the country, I've decided you and China, like India and China, might be tied for the most complicated tax systems in the world. So yeah, there you go. My heart goes out to you.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so we have to jump on our the topic that we're supposed to be talking about. So let me go ahead and introduce the People Strategy Forum. Welcome, everyone. So we usually have Jules kick us off, but unfortunately she's had to run to her many duties that she does. Those that join us regularly know that Jules is an actress, and she's also a producer, and she's a very busy person, and we're lucky to have her. Unfortunately, she's not going to be with us today. So I'll introduce the People Strategy Forum today and a little bit about our purpose here. Our purpose is to elevate the overall profession of people strategies. Those leaders, we often have leaders join us and HR practitioners that are interested in how to make more meaningful workplaces and more productive workplaces for their people and their clients. So that's why we're here. Overall, to introduce some of the people on a call here today, we have Sumit Singla. Sumit is a people strategist out of India. We're very pleased to have him here. Deep expertise and always some great world perspective on rewards and people strategies. Then we have Shar Miller. Shar Miller is a coach in HR. She's also taken on the HR leadership in several organizations, large and small. She's also a small business owner and can tell us a lot about the experiences of applying these strategies in those small businesses. And then myself, my name is Sam Reeve. I'm a reward strategist. I specialize in compensation and talent practices and specifically a lot of technology and fintech and globally. So I bring the rewards element to the conversation. So, but I do want to introduce you to Donnell Green, our speaker today. But before I get there, I want to talk a little bit about the forum and how we're working here. So we are broadcasting on several different platforms. We're currently here on Zoom. And so if you have joined us on the Zoom platform, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll be able to take those as we go. And Sumit will be monitoring that and breaking into the conversation when we have questions. And we'll also have time at the end as well. We'll if you have some questions and you want to have it at the end, we can prepare those then. But like I mentioned, we're on multiple platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so forth. And so if you happen to be on one of those platforms listening to us, feel free to drop your questions there as well, and we'll get to those after the session here today. So a little bit about Donnell. Donnell is a longtime friend of mine. We worked together at Barclays and BlackRock a long time ago, and she is now an executive coach and focusing on talent strategies and so forth. And so she has a wealth of experience and that she's going to share with us today. And so on the special topic of how leaders can future-proof themselves and their teams. I mean, right now there's so many things that are going on in the world, and it's important for us to more than ever to ensure that we have practices that are agile and resilient to those changes, so that we don't have those disruptions that we're experiencing now, and we can operate business in this chaotic environment. So as we get started here, Donnell, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into HR and your journey and finally your passion for helping leaders be the better version of themselves.
Thanks, Sam. It's so great to be here with you guys again. I love working with this group. You guys are fantastic at what you do, and I can't think of anyone better to partner with on compensation related questions, Sam. So thank you again for having me. How I got here. My background started in psychology. I went to school thinking I was going to grow up and become a therapist or a social psychologist. And I did an internship in a state hospital and decided it was a little intense for me, that I needed something a little bit different. It was pretty stressful. I took a lot of it home with me. At the time, I had this amazing mother who was on track to become CEO of a financial institution, great role model for me, who was taking courses about building company culture. She was studying things like Southwest, how they got started, how they created this super fun environment that everyone came to work and had a great time. I mean, I don't know how many of you know the story about everyone at Southwest came and had fun. Right? They got on the airplane. You loved riding because they told jokes. They were silly. They didn't take themselves too seriously. And I started to really reflect on, wow, that would be really cool to understand, how do people come to work every day and have a great time? How do leaders do that? What does a CEO do and wake up and think about every single day that makes people come to work and love what they're doing so much that even the customers love their experience? And it put me down the path of executive coaching and learning about how leaders become great so they can have great companies. I've spent over 20 years inside organizations looking at two primary things. One is inside the context of leadership. How do they lead their talent strategies, their talent practices? And the second thing is leadership programs. So building the skills of a leader so they can be that person who's running a firm or running a team and people love what they do.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Donnell, for that background. But right now, I mean, the world, as we mentioned, is just ever changing, and there's been, of course, conflict after conflict right now. And what are the main things that leaders need to know to be able to be ready, or to be ready to face this in the light now? What are the new trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, so it really does bring us this concept of future proofing. And maybe it's, we would say it's a beat late, like who would have thought COVID was going to come and we'd start, like future proofing would have been be ready for, having to shift everything for a pandemic. Or right now I'm talking to organizations where, the number one topic really is retaining key people and hiring, right? Like that's the buzz. And as you sit and you work on that, then you find out the other company's biggest stress is how are they going to get employees out of Ukraine, the ones that can leave? The men are stuck there. So how do they get their family out if they can get them out? And all of a sudden, everything else seems really minor in comparison, right? We're talking about people's whole lives are being like literally blown up. So it really has me stepping back and really thinking about what are the things that we know historically organizations have done. And I'm talking about historically, I'm talking like early 1900s to now. We've been through depressions. We've watched Disney do booms and busts. We watched Coca-Cola do their things. And I'm going back to like GE days. I'm looking at what all these great companies have peeled back this onion and asked themselves to do over time. And I have to say, I'm pulling out one of the oldies but goodies. Shell put into place scenario planning. They were one of the first companies that really sat down and got their executives together in room. Today, we'll call it a virtual room, right? We know we're not going to put a bunch of people in a room anymore. People are living all over the world. And they did hardcore scenario planning. And I think now is a perfect time to look at what we've been going through for the last few years and say, they were onto something, right? They actually thought it through. They were like, let's talk about the good things that can happen. Let's talk about the bad things that can happen. We've been talking about pandemics. All of a sudden now we're hearing about food shortages, right? We've got the climate changes that are happening. We have farmers being impacted by the price of fertilizer. What happens if you come to work one day and your employees are like, I need subsidies for food? I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could happen. And one of the things going on in your world that you probably can talk about, Sam, is this whole drive around compensation and benefits. Today I was reading about, Starbucks, right? Back, not even that long ago, they were the leading edge on benefits and compensation. Well, every company in the world can copycat that.
That's right.
So now what are we going to do? How much more can we pay people to actually stay in their job? So the question is, how do you actually have them not look for a job? That's right. The question that I think that leaders need to be asking themselves. What do we need to do to have them not look for a job? And Sam, I'd love to hear your thoughts around what are you seeing in terms of compensation and what companies are doing right in that area?
Well, it's a balance, and so it's a balance a lot. One side is compensation, and the other side is your workforce experience. And so when you have a poor workforce experience, right, you have to pay more in comp to make up for that. And so those companies out there that are becoming more resilient are focusing on that workforce experience and ensuring that elements are improved so that they don't have to leverage or pull the compensation lever so much. So what are those elements? They're making sure that leadership is clearly communicating the vision of the company and where it's going and how it's responding, what it stands for, and having that communication in place, making sure that teamwork is strong across the company so that people can work together easily and so forth. Making sure that employees are able to do their best work and they have the systems and the time and the talent and those people to work with and draw upon. And then they have those development opportunities and so forth. This is all part of that workforce experience that companies need to shore up to strengthen their attractiveness to those candidates out there, and then also and also make sure that their compensation is in alignment with that. So it's very important.
Yeah, and I want to draw a line between all the things you talked about and the leader or the manager who's in the center of this whole experience, right? That is a human being who gets so many hours a day to sleep, eat, take care of themselves, and do their job. And one of the things that I am seeing happen more and more is the pressure of management and leadership is causing those key people to want to think about leaving the work environment. So there are layers of what we're talking about here. One of the things I think organizations must do to future-proof is they have to work with their leaders and managers who are people who are leading others, managing teams around self-care, their own, how they take care of anything that they need to be good for others. If we're not good for ourselves, it's really difficult to be good for other people. And I don't care what it takes for organizations, I'd put right at the top of when you're doing your scenario planning, do every scenario you can think of around how you shore up your managers and leaders. The pressure is really great on those people right now. And the worst thing that can happen is we skip them focusing on the team's welfare and not really weight the care of the managers and leaders and how well they're being taken care of, looked after, encouraged to take care of themselves, right? Taking time out.
That's right.
And one of
But I was just going to say, I know Shar is a big proponent of the healthy workplace. And so, yeah, that's a critical element. And so Shar, I mean, those are a key piece that you have focused on in your organization. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think it's incredible to actually have a strategy with the healthy workforce, because my particular company is a health advocacy company. But I do want to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. So I'm going to point out one little aspect. We're a small startup company. Healthcare is going through a lot of volatility. Healthcare organizations, particularly small startup companies, where in like my situation, I knew that it's hard to offer ongoing stable jobs for my employees ongoing. So although I wanted to retain and create a healthy environment, and believe me, I have very loyal employees, but I also wanted to be very honest with my employees for the fact that they may end up having to get another job. And so I think that a little bit of the devil advocate side is be prepared for the unknown. I mean, we didn't know the pandemic was going to come. We didn't know that there's going to be impact to the fact that we could not perhaps create a sustainable job, and we may have to go through periods of laying off some of our employees. So a little bit of my devil advocacy is that I did talk about what I call career mobility with my employees. I did talk about the potential that we may have to temporarily shut down. And when that happened, my employees were grateful because they felt like I was being honest and forthright and authentic. And actually, they were prepared. They had other jobs or were prepared to pivot, perhaps have another opportunity, have their LinkedIn updated, be prepared for anything that can change. And I will say, even working with the big, large organizations, I don't think it's necessarily responsible to not bring up to your employees' attention that there are potential changes ahead of time that we can't control. So you should always be prepared for that. So I think that's part of a healthy workforce. And I think that's also part of mental health, because a lot of employees are worried about their jobs and they're worried about their future. So those are just a couple of my comments.
Sure, I think those are great points. And I think you're absolutely correct in your view that being honest with people is number one, right? So yeah, I cannot disagree with you at all there. I think an example around where I'd say that if organizations were going a step further than what you're talking about, and they actually were thinking about people they didn't want to have leave because they are, you know, they want those people there for the long term. Those are the people who are sometimes out looking, and the companies aren't paying attention. And I don't mean companies, like there are individuals here, like we're so busy, we lose track. And I have a great example of somebody that I've worked with who I think is fantastic. Mid-career, definitely high potential, fast learner, willing to take on really complicated initiatives, small team. So the team couldn't afford to lose very many people because it was already small. They came back to hybrid working, right? come into the office 3 days a week. Well, this person's commute was over an hour one way. Said, I don't really want to do it. They're like, everyone's coming back 3 days a week. What do you think happened the following week? They start
Yeah,
looking. They
that's
start
right.
looking. And then what had happened? Got a job offer, 20% pay increase, 5 minutes from road, not enforcing a hybrid work environment, did a completely different approach around 40% from in the office. It was a completely much more open approach. And so what is that person left to do but go like, well, this is a better job. Now, the question is it really a better job? It's not probably really a better job. Is the company really better? Maybe not. I mean, these are good people probably in both places, probably really good companies, both of them are the same. But it was that moment where the company could have said, do we want to be the organization that loses our people over enforcing the hybrid work environment at a time when people have more choices? And one of the things I see companies doing that are closer to getting this right is they're listening to their people more than ever. So another example is, and then again, there isn't an answer for a company. Like we can't say, hey, do hybrid work or don't do hybrid work or do one thing or another. The real thing here is listening to your people in your organization and having the sensibility to listen to the leaders and managers who are closest to the teams and say, you know what our organization team members really, really want is, and fill in the blank. One company, it was an extra week off. Give me a week off. I just need a break. They gave an extra week off. Fewer people started, like their attrition went down. Another company, they started distributing equity all the way down. So instead of having equity just for the most senior folks, distributed all the way down, everyone became, quote, company owners. And that was one of the ways that they responded to what their employees needed. So I think the worst thing we can do is say there is a solution. I think number one, Shar, to your point is we didn't know what was going to happen, and we still don't know what the future holds. Getting those people to start to think through, let's start to be more serious with all the different scenarios we can't even imagine. Like, let's start to innovate. What happens when leaders begin to have those conversations is they will start to have solutions that may not go directly with that scenario, but those solutions that are designed and pulled out from that process will be applicable to other situations they're entering into now. Like they'll have ideas. And I think one of the gifts we give managers and leaders is time and space to think, which is what the exercises of scenario planning really give leaders and managers. The space to think together, to be in strategic conversations, to be in what ifs, to go best case, worst case, how do we handle it? And that's one of the things that's missing today in companies, really the space to think together.
So let's talk about the first steps of scenario planning. I mean, a lot of things that we do at CompTeam as the first step is to do that diagnosis, understand, what does the workforce at our company want? What are they looking for? What is meaningful to them? So that's the first thing. I mean, it could be extending that equity plan all the way down. It could be having other types of perks or having certain types of health benefits and so forth. But it's different at every company. We can't assume. We need to ask the question, right? So what are the first steps that you would recommend in going through a valid scenario planning exercise?
Yeah, so I land on 3 heavy duty levers. One is programmatic leadership development is a great way to do a bit of leadership development, like how do we become better leaders and managers? We'll use the words interchangeably here. Creating exercises where people start to go worst case, best case, and you put together a few different scenarios for them to work with. I mean, what would happen if another pandemic came? Like, can we even talk about that? What happens if Ukraine happens in 4 other locations in the world, and one of them is where you do all of your data backup, right? So this whole idea of where are your security facilities, and start to really think through what are those things that could go wrong that we could get better at. The other one is attrition. Let's talk about what happens if suddenly there's some random world event and X percentage of our employees are actually called into the military. Like, do we actually know how many people that could be? Do we actually know the answer to the question, right? So you start to give them ideas of things they could begin to work through if those scenarios happen. The other thing is you can actually have them create some scenarios. I tend to work with organizations to give them a headline scenario. I've had one where, the price of gold goes up 5 times and, commodities are really low and fuel can't be purchased other than 1 day a week. And, we create layers of like trauma and drama. And part of it is so that we become more awake, right? We become more awake. And then the other thing is, and the CEO gets sick, right? So who's going to be in charge? All of a sudden you realize like the leadership team really might need to step up in a different way and work together differently. And we start to get into team dynamics. So we build that inside a leadership program design. So that's one. The other thing that I believe every organization needs to do in terms of scenario planning are talent reviews. I'm not suggesting every company needs to do it on a performance potential matrix. I'm working with companies more and more where it's like leadership and performance, using a little bit of the Navy SEAL model you guys have heard me talk about, trust and performance, using different axes on the quote, the 4 block, the 9 block, whatever you want to call it, but actually having the practice of talent reviews. The amount of time companies and managers spend in talent reviews is minuscule compared to the amount of time you spend hiring and recruiting. Minuscule. And really using those to think through key talent, impact of lost, are people operating at the top of their license? It's the concept we're hearing about more and more. The idea is you don't have a doctor do what a nurse practitioner can do. You don't have a nurse practitioner do what a nurse can do. You don't have a nurse do what the manager or the admins are doing. And the idea that through job construction, coming out of talent reviews, you can enable people to operate at the top of their license. You're getting more productivity. And one of the things that organizations have tended to do in the past is overhire for jobs, right? So strategically, it's starting to become really smart to underhire for a job and give people growth, give them the ability to grow into that role. So a combination of the talent reviews, making sure people are operating at the top of their license and really thinking strategically about how do you actually maybe slightly underhire for a job rather than overhire for a job and get people at the top of their license over a path of development.
I completely agree with what Donnell with what you're saying, and I have been at many talent reviews, and I love your new terminology that you're bringing into place. It doesn't sound as traditional as the former talent review process and the 9-box process. I've also perceived that we now in the last, I'll just say 6 years or ever since all this wild changes and is that the challenges of the executive team is to really have those crucial conversations and those heart-to-heart conversations with their talent. It's easy to step in a boardroom and place your top talent based upon, their top strengths and stick them in this box and that box and this box and that box. But truly going back and having those crucial dialogues about competencies, passions, talents, drives, and also what is it that is, what's the word you use? I mean, you said top talent. It's the
operating at the top of your license.
License. Okay, right.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the top of your license, right? I think that's or your top potential perhaps is one of the words I would use. But really going back and having that dialogue with that employee and saying, okay, this is the top of your license. I'm using your phrases. And now what's it going to help you to take it to the next level from a career architecture standpoint, the career mobility aspect of being prepared for those crises such as changes in the worker organization and being prepared if you are at the top of your license to now look at other licenses and perhaps get ready for that type of change that your role is going to potentially be impacted. So are you ready for perhaps that transition to move into more of a technology space or a marketing space or something very different than you're used to? And that your license, as you say, is going to adapt and change because every day our business is changing. So what can we do to prepare you for the future? So I think that with the executives that I've worked with, we sit in those boardrooms once or twice a year. We place everybody in the 9 boxes, but then there's no follow-up. There's never any integration into the full talent management process, and there's no full integration into the performance management process. Oftentimes employees have felt left in the dark, and then they hear through the rumor mill what was said about them, which then can be very toxic. So I think that needs to be well thought out. Sumit, I think you had a thought too, so I'm going to put myself on mute.
Absolutely, I fully agree with what you were saying, Shar, and also with Donnell's point. So I've been part of many talent reviews and seen a lot of organizations approaching them completely the wrong way, where all of a sudden you look around at the market and you say, oh, everyone's doing a talent review, let me jump onto it. And you end up having the completely opposite effect, because what happens is people who were settled in, they were operating at, if not the top of their license, close to the top, now start feeling unsettled, that these are difficult times. There's COVID happening, people are losing jobs, the economy is not doing too well. A talent review, clearly it means you're trying to find grounds to show how I'm not suited for what I'm doing. So people actually double down and start being more protective of where they were, and a perfectly smoothly running organization, which wasn't poised for hyper growth, actually starts to shrink, because the listening that Donnell mentioned earlier never happened. So there was never any intention to be a healthy employer overall from a cultural standpoint. We're just picking up the talent review process and plugging it in. And that's one of the risks I've seen in action in multiple companies in this part of the world.
Yeah, the most demoralizing thing for an HR team and for managers are talent reviews that are exercised mechanically and nothing happens with them. For me, the talent review, I want to say I kind of micro blow it up. Okay, when I say micro blow it up, I really believe the practice is a differentiator for the best companies. But the companies that do culture, great, have them, but they design them not necessarily with the traditional performance and potential access, which no one can ever agree on what potential is. Let's not kid ourselves. That's the debate, right? So let's throw out potential. We're never going to agree. But let's look at what that other access could be that's a cultural driver and relevant across the firm. And every talent review, in my mind, would be smart to have a ground rule called a career conversation happens with every single person who is discussed after this exercise. After that career conversation, we're going to come back as a management or leadership team, and we're going to talk about how did those career conversations go? How did that person hear that feedback? What are the things that they want for their next whatever? And when I say next whatever, the next whatevers are surprising everybody. Okay, we're hearing more and more about people like, what I don't actually want a promotion. What I want is a 4-day work week. Okay, we can do a 4-day work week. Are you okay with a forfeits pay? Great. Right? And that person just thinks I got the dream job, because what happened was we had a talent review conversation. We went back and had a career conversation. What does that person need and want? What's the feedback that's useful for where they are? And then we did something with it. Now, I'm not saying you can do that with thousands of people, but a well-organized, talent review process, it is the best use of time. It is far better than you're going to spend going and hiring people because you lost the person who only wanted to work 4 days a week and is going off and doing something different, right?
Absolutely.
But we have to blow up some of the old ways of doing things and get a much newer lens for this in work environment.
Right. That's just a regular part of management that seems to be weak at many companies is the ability to have these effective conversations with their people. And so I think that that's one of the biggest growth areas in a lot of companies is to have that manager training so that these effective conversations can happen.
Yeah. And just, another aside, you raised something that I think is really important, Sam, which is having the effective conversations. Again, in the spirit of micro blowing things up, this idea of low performer, low potential, like no one ends up there. Let's not kid ourselves, right? So why would we even have those be metrics when we think about talent discussions? So pretty much when I'm working with organizations, to the extent that I can influence them, we're getting rid of the negativity in these talent conversations. There is something called inconsistent performance, right? That is real. Like people can perform reliably most of the time, some of the time, all the time. So we might look at things like on the lower end of performance, you're an inconsistent performer, right? On things like leadership, we might be like, like I wouldn't say you're still challenging leadership in a talent review discussion, but it's like, what are the elements of leadership that we say matter? So if we're talking about being a culture carrier, if we're talking about being a good collaborator, these are kinds of the areas where we might say you're still challenged around collaboration with others. Or a big one coming into play is self-awareness. I'm all about, one of the tenets of leadership is self-awareness. Your self-awareness is still challenged, right? Here's some examples. Give people examples. How can we work together to make you a little bit more self-aware so you're not kind of like taking that great strength you have and using it in the wrong way, right? So part of it is making the conversations that manager can have through the talent review more approachable for them. You want managers to feel like, I can have this conversation. This is doable. I'm not going to demoralize somebody. It's actually going to leave them inspired and engaged and ambitious for what's in front of them. I'm going to be a safe person to say what I really want.
Right.
So that's part of the development of leaders.
And so my philosophy is it starts at the very beginning of the employment process. I believe that at the time of, or even before hire, that the talent dialogue is happening prior to hire. And then also the talent dialogue is happening throughout the onboarding process and the development process and the career process. I have witnessed and been part of very upset, disgruntled employees that have come to HR with complaints that the first time the talent dialogue happened after a calibration session, where their leader plopped down the employee and said, we all voted you incompetent at your job. And the employee is like, wait a minute, I had excellent on my last performance of appraisal, and now I'm suddenly considered incompetent. And suddenly I now am at the bottom of the box. And what exactly is this 9-box thing? And I've actually had employees come to me just completely baffled. Now and so I think I really believe in the positive psychology dialogue. I do believe that the positive psychology dialogue has to happen at the time of hire, and it has to be part of the culture that the employee knows that talent dialogues are going to occur throughout the year. We are going to have one-on-ones that is going to not only be about your performance and the outcomes of your performance and the shortcomings and the successes, but we're also going to be talking about you as an individual and your talents, your competencies, your desires, your passions throughout the year. So after the quote session with the executive team, the calibration session or the talent management dialogue, that the employee doesn't feel that they're plopped down and given a surprise. So us HR leaders know that employees don't want surprises, right? But sadly, unfortunately, many leaders dump that knowledge after a performance review or after a succession review, and the employee is absolutely baffled. They're like, okay, well, all right, so I'm worth nothing. So, all right, time to update my LinkedIn and time to start searching for a different job, which unfortunately, they could probably be a great talent if the leader was honest with them all along.
Yeah, I think the point is that, when we're looking at leadership of the future and what leadership should be is there needs to have a relationship, a professional relationship with your employees, so you know what's going on, you have your finger on the pulse, you understand what is going on in the daily basis, so that there's not this miscommunication that arises, because we all know if we take a break and we lose touch with the reality of what certain employees are going through, then that's what causes that misalignment and expectations and so forth. So I think having those regular discussions are critical. But when we're thinking about this overall in the context of future proofing, I mean, I think that's the big piece, is making sure that you're having these conversations all the time. But what are some other elements that you're seeing, Donnell, as far as how leaders can further future-proof their teams?
Yeah, I think it's an intersection of the world of like role construction. You know, you guys have talked a lot about career architecture. I think now is a really important time for companies to work with their HR teams and really think about how they're constructing roles. So this idea of people working at the top of their license contains a few things, which is, what are the core responsibilities in that job? What are the key deliverables? And are there things that we could remove from that person's day-to-day life? So where does digitization, you know, maybe sit in it? And I'm learning so much about this every day from my own, you know, people at the companies I work with. You know, you end up with these customer service teams, and customer service is all about the human experience, right? So we want to keep a high level of human experience. How often do we sit and look at the customer service roles and go, okay, let's keep the high level of human experience, but what could get digitized? And it's amazing what can get digitized now with artificial intelligence, the use of bots. I mean, there are so many things now that are kind of like the repeat questions that every customer calls in and asks about. Are there ways of delivering it in a way that feels high touch without it requiring a person, but they still can get a person? And I am not a customer service person. You know, like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have any expertise in it. But what I'm seeing is this idea of zooming back, thinking through, how could we do this differently? How could we innovate using digitization? And then how can we actually think about the role construction differently? So that person has a more fulfilling role, but they're also operating at the highest level of productivity for that job, eliminating things that I would say are maybe more administrative than they need to be. And I think organizations that are getting smart about the productivity of their teams are beginning to look at this a lot more seriously. They're not looking at it like passively, but they're looking at the role construction much more seriously, and to the level of like, how can we fundamentally start to change these jobs?
So do you remember when the robots or the computer started coming out, and there was
Is this a movie or is this real?
No, I'm talking
Okay.
about, I mean, some of us are a little older than others around us. But I just remember that there was such a fear that if we go to AI, if we have computers, it's going to replace my job, because everything's going to now become so digitized. And now everything, my job's going to get, disappear. When what you're saying is, no, it's only going to help you be more productive, work smarter, not harder. It's going to help you improve your ability to communicate more effectively, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, in my memory, I just remember the fear. Our employees were thinking, oh my gosh, my job is just going to disappear to thin air because a computer is going to take over my job.
Yeah, not in a million. Like, I've kind of made this one of my side hobbies, to look at this part of how the work environment is beginning to reshape with computers, robots, digitization. A couple of years ago, I took MIT's course on artificial intelligence, and really, artificial intelligence is woven into everything, right? Like machine learning, robotics, everything we're seeing. And I went into it with a genuine question, Shar, of like, are people going to start to lose their jobs as we make things more digital and more technological? Are we going to lose our human experience? And I won't say I've landed on a conclusion about where we're going to land in terms of our human experience. What I can say most definitively is we are not going to have fewer jobs. What we're seeing happen in the job market is the sophistication for jobs is increasing. So the number one issue with this movement into the digital robotic world, and by the way, I've been moving here for like decades, right? It just keeps getting more and more advanced, is really the skill set of people who are like Sam, like can do algorithms and programming, and the number of people we have who can do those jobs that enable all the other jobs is where there's a big crunch for talent. And those companies are having to get really creative about I mean, pay, Sam will tell you. I mean, the amount of money people getting paid in those jobs is huge. So one of my questions to some of my clients is, if somebody wants to intern to the ones high paying jobs because they really are driven by the money, what's the training plan to get them there?
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right in what you're saying in the elevating your position, operating at the top of your license, like you're talking about. We're supposed to be working with AI, and we're supposed to be elevating our practice, making ourselves better, bringing the human element. I know that you've talked a lot about this, Sumit. What are your thoughts?
It's an interesting point, Sam. And I mean, if you look at history, ever since the Industrial Revolution, people have always been worried that machinery or automation or any kind of technology is going to destroy jobs. So far, it hasn't happened, right? I mean, when the steam engine came up, of course, none of us were around, but one can read about how people were fearful, and they actually went and sabotaged a lot of stuff as well, thinking there's a lot that they stand to lose. But with AI, the definition's changing. So from artificial intelligence is now being called augmented intelligence, where the idea is to support a human brain in taking better decisions. And example, I used to be at Accenture. We had a robotic HR system there. So it was called a Digital People Advisor, DIPA for short. And the idea was not to take jobs away from HR people. And of course, a lot of HR folks would be appalled at what, a robot acting as an HR person? Never gonna happen. I can see Shar's expression, just rolling her eyes. But the idea was that this robot would answer policy queries. So a lot of time of the HR business partners would be spent in answering questions like, I've got a foreign trip coming up. What visa category do I need to apply under? What's the paperwork that's required? So standard questions with a little bit of AI, with a little bit of machine learning. You take the load away from the HRBP to answer such questions, and they can actually focus on more strategic and fulfilling work. So their engagement actually, so we recorded the engagement levels. The engagement levels of HR people went up. People were pleased that they got answers faster, so you didn't have to write an email and wait for the rest of the day when your email would get out of the queue and you'd get an answer. You could get your answers then. So the entire organization faced elevation in that sense. So, I mean, I think that's the way to go, and that's the future, really.
Yeah, as a
Totally
business
agree.
owner, I actually had an HR business partner. I actually had, even though I could be an HR business partner. And yes, we did have a website that, obviously their portal, and I could go through the basics. But I always resorted to my director that reported to me as the owner of the company. I said, I do want you to talk to your HR business partner as a thought partner, because even though you have the policy and you know that the laws have changed, you still need to have a thought partner in regards to having that dialogue and the best way of having the dialogue. And please believe me, the employment laws also change on a daily basis, every day. So don't just assume that you're a seasoned HR person and you don't know about all the employment laws that have changed that you can find on a computer.
I think that's a good point, especially as Sumit has mentioned. If there's always those elements where there's some standardized knowledge or things that you want to be delivered consistently. I mean, I think we've all experienced a situation when we call customer service for some of our vendors or something like that, and we get an answer, and then we call back and ask the same question, we get a different answer, and sometimes different answers are good. But when we're looking at some of those consistent policy elements, I mean, there should be some consistency in how information is delivered. Now, when we're looking at some more strategic elements, we want to have a good diversity of thought, and that's where the expertise, elevating the license should go. Of looking at different sides of an issue, giving different ideas. But those standard elements, those standard things that need to be delivered, that can be automated, or put down to or delegated to a level of individual that can grow and learn delivering that information.
It's pretty exciting times that we're living in, and companies are being challenged in ways that they've never been challenged. People, humans, leaders, managers, we're all facing like a lot of new things. And I'm going to just come back to if you're in the role of a leadership, leading a team, managing a team, leading a company, the single best thing you can do for the future of your company and your team is to take really good care of yourself. And if you are struggling with that, I would say reach out to an expert, get help. And I'm not just talking, like just mental stuff. I'm talking about coaches who do training for like physical fitness, meditation coaches. There are resources for managing your stress and your own energy. It is the single most important thing that a leader or manager can do, followed by thinking through things like, what are the different scenarios, creating space for what could happen and how we could be better prepared, listening to your people, what do they want, and then really looking at your talent practices as, foundational. Great companies who have gone through, decades and decades of changes always have very strong talent practices.
Great,
Absolutely.
thanks, Donnell. Go ahead, Sumit.
I was saying I completely resonate with that point, and disruption in the market can come from anywhere. For example, the largest watchmaking company in the world today is Apple, and I mean, 2 decades ago, you'd never have imagined that a technology company would sell more watches than all the other companies making watches. But it's not like the rest are out of business. They've just pivoted to a different model. They've started doing new things, and the competitive advantage is in the people. So you can copy and plug and play a lot of things. You can't simply replicate the kind of talent that a company has, and that's where the workforce experience and the culture is pivotal, and it's the differentiator in today's day and age.
I love your example to Apple. Thank you, Sumit. Donnell, as you were describing that, I was imagining back in my leadership days, often thinking I didn't need a coach. And it's like you're in the middle of the ocean and you just come up for air after losing air from your scuba gear, and you're just treading there. Where's the boat? Where's the boat? I know that's kind of a weird analogy, but essentially treading water by yourself. We all need help. We all need coaches. It doesn't matter if you're a president, even our president, and I'm not getting political here, all leaders, all top athletes, all levels deserve a coach. Even those levels that are more the frontline levels need a coach. I think being able to have a person to talk to, because, particularly on the HR side, I can't, particularly because my husband also after my ex-husband worked for the same hospital, I couldn't go home and talk to him about anything because it was all confidential. It was all stuff that he wasn't allowed to hear. I couldn't talk about a potential layoff that was going to happen, or some of the changes in the future that was going to happen that could potentially change his job. At the time when I was an HR person, I was just treading water, trying to do it on my own, and trying to get executive coaches for my executives, but not realizing I needed a coach myself. And so I look back in those years thinking my mindset, my mental capacity, the ability to do 12 zillion jobs at the same time, and I was literally drowning.
Yes,
So,
good point.
Anyway.
Definitely
yes.
good points, Shar. Everybody needs a coach, especially, and I think that I like that parallel you mentioned about all top athletes have a coach, right? So if you want to be a top leader, you need one too. So we are coming to the end of our time here. So I do want to acknowledge our sponsor, TMA USA. And so TMA is an assessment tool that gives us the opportunity to learn more about our people. And so it is based on positive psychology, as we've been talking about during this this session, something that's critically important and keeps engagement in your staff. So it is not a judgmental assessment. It's something is a tool for us to get to know our people better, the talents and drives, and where do they want to go in their future career. And also, very importantly, what's their best learning style? How do they bring in information? So if you'd like to learn more about TMA, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to direct you in the right direction. All right, I know that we have just a few more minutes. If there's any questions across our listeners, please enter them now. But we've talked about a lot of things here. I mean, Donnell, you covered that we need to enable managers. We need to think about new avenues of digitalization and but also keeping that human element. Ways to increase agility and resilience across the HR team by having coaching, developing new models to be more impactful, and other elements of the workforce experience. So thank you so much for all that knowledge.
My pleasure, Sam. I really enjoy joining you guys. It's a great organization that you have here.
Thank you so much.
It's always a lot of fun. So Sumit, do we have any questions that have come in or comments through the chat?
No, just that Daniel's been listening actively as always, and been appreciating the use of terms like layers, and of course, Shara's stories and comments as well. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us once again.
Yes, thank you for all our active listeners out there and participating in the forum and making this a better medium. It's always wonderful to have all our listeners on. So thank you so much. Well, Donnell, as it said, it's been a wonderful once again. So thank you so much for being on the People Strategy Forum, and hope to see you in the near future.
All right, absolutely. Thanks.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.